All right. Assalamualaikum, everyone. My name is Noreen. I am an MD PhD student, and today we're going to be talking to you all about how research cures diseases, and as researchers ourselves, what are ways that you guys can get involved in research. So before we begin, um, we always like to start off our webinar series and all of our meetings um, kind of with a reminder of why we're doing this. So these are a couple of verses from Surah Alaq. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم كلا إن الإنسان لا يبقى إن راه استغنى إن إلا ربك رجعا. Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot of congealed blood. Read, and your Lord is most generous, who taught knowledge by the pen, taught man that which he did not know. Nay, indeed, man transgressed rebelliously because he sees himself self-sufficient. Indeed, to your Lord is the return. And so I personally like to start off my our webinar series with Surah Al-Alaq because we are going to be talking about the importance of reading and education, and it's really a core principle of our faith. So it's just a good reminder of where we're starting from. So this webinar series is put on by AMWPA, the American Muslim Women Physicians Association, to improve the condition of women's health, provide a platform for Muslim women in medicine, and raise the awareness of issues regarding the community welfare. And the tagline of AMWPA is preventative healthcare is our passion. Um, and then furthermore, it's a nonprofit 501(c)(3) that was incorporated in 2008. So all of those formalities out of the way, I want to introduce our panelists. So I can go first. I am a sixth-year MD PhD student from UT Southwestern in Dallas, and I'm currently starting on my fourth year of my PhD in cell and molecular biology. And I'll let Sarah introduce herself.
My name is Sarah Galliini. I am starting my seventh year in the MD PhD program here at University of Texas Health Center Houston. I'm doing my PhD in tumor immunology and therapeutics and pharmacology at MD Anderson Cancer Center.
Nabiha.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Nabiha. I'm a fourth year MD PhD student at Houston Methodist in partnership with Texas A&M and Houston. And I just started my first year of my PhD in cancer bio.
And finally, we have Trevor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Trevor Nguyen. I'm in the fourth year of the MD PhD program at UT Southwestern Dallas, and I'm going into my second year of being a PhD student studying neuroscience.
Okay. And if you've joined this series, you might not be too familiar about what a physician scientist really is. And so we just wanted to kind of define it before we go into further detail. A physician scientist is someone who does both clinical practice and scientific research. So they can either hold an MD only degree or an MD PhD degree, which is the degree that all four of us um, are uh, in. And then what I like to say is the reason why I chose to be a physician scientist or take on this career path is because I want to treat the patients of today and the future. And this is where research really comes into play of trying to cure or solve diseases and problems for the future. And then, you guys have heard about why I want to do MD PhD. Maybe we can start with Sarah, why you decided to take on this role.
Yeah, sure. So for me, I was always interested in the, tangible relationship between a pa physician and a patient, and the level of trust that's involved, and really feeling like you're directly being able to impact and improve the quality of life of that person. I got involved in research first as an undergraduate, and really it was appealing to me the potential to be able to impact the lives of many, many, many more people directly and indirectly through my work. And so that's really the motivation for me, being able to hopefully combine both the physician and the scientist aspects in order to bring my, newfound discoveries and findings to the clinic to my patients and have my clinical experiences really inform my research on the scientific side.
Nabiha?
Yeah, so as a child, I read a lot of sci-fi novels, and I was always very inspired by the discovery that was showcased in a lot of these stories, and I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to have that as something that I could say was my legacy. So that combined with wanting to have a tangible impact on patients, as Maureen and Sarah have said, um, presently and in the future, is what pushed me towards doing the MD PhD.
And then Trevor?
Yeah, I think for me, what's very interesting is that there are a lot of diseases that we have treatments for, and there are also a lot of diseases that we just kind of have things to make it a little better, but not really getting at the root of the problem. And in order to get to the root of the problem, you have to understand what the problem is at its core. And one physician once described it that in the 60s there was the space race. And, American president said we're going to get to the moon, and by the end of the decade, they got to the moon. But it's not that they started from scratch. There was a solid framework. They had an equation, force equals mass times acceleration. And if you just use that equation, the question is how much force do we need to get out of the Earth's gravitational pull? And so you have that foundational F equals ma, and you can do a lot with that. But for some of these diseases, we don't necessarily have the force equals mass acceleration equation yet. And in order to start treating some of these diseases, we have to really understand at its core what's the really underlying principle here. And I think that that's why research is really something that potentiates your ability to do as much good as you can.
Awesome. Do you want to take this next slide?
Yeah, so we'll talk about the MD PhD, which is one path that you can become a physician scientist. And so to clarify, really the role physician scientist just means that you are a doctor who is also doing science, or you could say you are a scientist who's also doing medicine and caring for the people. But the MD PhD is one way that you can go about doing that because you have both the MD degree, which gives you kind of a background in being able to treat diseases and caring for patients, whereas the PhD gives you a background in research. And specifically in this pathway, it generally is an 8-year dual degree program where um, for about twice as long as either pathway individually, you would end up having 2 degrees by the end of it. They tend to be fully funded, although there are some MD PhD programs where the PhD is funded and the MD you still have to pay for. And really, the goal of these is to get training in both medicine and research. And kind of to take a step back, there are a couple other pathways. One is that someone might say, okay, I really want to do research, and they end up doing a PhD. And then later they go on to get an MD a couple years later or something. Or they could get an MD and decide, I really want to double down on research as a way to care for my patients better. And so they could pursue a PhD afterwards. And then some people, they might get an MD first, and then they just do a lot of research so that they effectively have the same skill set and experience as someone who um, would have had a PhD. And I think the main underlying thing is that you will need an MD for whatever you do because in order to care for patients in the United States, you'll have to have some sort of credentials for that. So either an MD or a DO degree. Um, and the science part is really up to you. However much science you want to do, it's really a spectrum because there are people who have MD degrees and they're doing really great work and they're still studying like the receptors on the cellular level of a disease, or they're really getting down into the fundamental aspects of the disease. And they don't necessarily have a PhD, but they're doing like very basic science level research. And the MD PhD, I like to think of it as just a convenient package. If you know you're going to get both, and you know that you want both, then sometimes you can just apply to the MD PhD program and they kind of take care of that for you. It's kind of like getting a travel package where the plane ticket and the hotel are both combined for you. And so there are many different programs. I see that there's a question in the chat about which programs provide full tuition. I think the vast majority of programs tend to provide the full tuition. There are a couple programs where it's still an MD PhD program, but it's slightly separated, where they're a little less integrated, and you might have to pay for your own MD. And I think there are a lot of people, if they do like a build your own, where they do an MD degree somewhere and negotiate to be able to have time off to take about 4 years to do their PhD, those people would tend to pay for their own MD, and then the PhD would generally be paid for by the program. So the last part of this slide is this MSTP thing, and that stands for Medical Scientist Training Program. And that just refers to programs that the National Institutes of Health, NIH, gives money to in order to support. And so all MSTP programs will give an MD PhD by the end of it. So all MSTP programs are MD PhD programs, but not every MD PhD program receives money from the NIH in order to carry out their activities. And so, in a way, you could kind of think that if an MD PhD program is good enough to get the NIH grant so that the government will pay and support those students, then in a way, you might consider the MSTP programs to be a slightly higher tier of program. Although for all of these programs, you're already talking about like the cream of the crop student, the cream of the crop physician, scientist, trainee. And so in essence, all of these MD PhD programs are going to be pretty darn good. But in a way, you can kind of think of that as it has reached a certain tier that the NIH considers it to be well worth the investment to support those students. And so there are fewer MSTP programs as a result. So the curriculum tends to be structured pretty similarly between programs with a couple variations. Generally, you're going to do some basic medical school training for the first years, and then they will have a graduate school portion in the middle, and then at the end, you will finish your medical training. And so for any MD degree, there's kind of like a checklist of things that if you want to call yourself an MD degree granting program, you have to have this training, you have to have that training, you have to have that training. So they kind of split it up. And a lot of programs, just talking about the MD degree itself, it starts with the classroom, the lecture hall, the textbook, and the exams. And then they move on to the actual practical experience of being in the hospital, seeing patients, and getting practice in the operating room, right? And so that kind of provides a convenient separation where the medical school portion that is in the classroom and the textbooks and the lecture halls, and I guess now the recorded videos, lectures watched at 2x speed, those tend to be the first part of med school. And that might be the part that you end up doing before your PhD. And at least at my program, we finish all of that in the first 2 years, and then we do just a little bit of clinical, practical experience in the hospital. And then we take a short excursion to do our PhD. And so um, essentially, that's a very similar structure across many programs. Some programs might have a little bit before you go off to the PhD. Some programs will have it so that you go to the PhD program a little earlier, and they save stuff for the latter part. And overall, it's a pretty similar experience, and I wouldn't really expect that to change the character of your program very much. So, what do MD, PhD graduates end up doing? A vast majority end up being in academia. Academia refers to essentially working for a school um, or an academic research hospital. So there are some hospitals that are private. You go in, they have an emergency room, they have doctors there. And then there are other hospitals that are really like a hybrid between a school, a teaching center, a training center, a research center. And so those tend to be a more academic structure where the goal is to care for patients as well as train the future generation of people working in that discipline. So many people end up in academia because you're doing research. It's hard to have a laboratory full of mice if you are working in a private practice, right? Where you just visit the clinic off the highway, and in the back there's a bunch of research equipment. Generally, a lot of research will happen at an academic center, although there are some that end up going off to industry, and you can really do some high impact work in industry. If people are developing the next medical device, they're developing the next pharmaceutical drug to cure a disease, it helps to have people who have treated patients and understand the ins and outs of actually caring for patients with that disease, as well as a strong research background to be able to understand whether or not a certain direction in the research might be worthwhile. And then there is a group that does private practice. And I think that a good takeaway here is that no one is necessarily forcing you into what you're doing after you graduate. And so some people may end up not doing research after they graduate the MD PhD program. And sometimes this just happens because life changes or your interests change, and life happens, and sometimes that's okay. Um, and so many graduates end up going in with the dream and interest of doing academic research. That's kind of a strong driver. But at the end of the day, people end up doing what they find most valuable to them after they graduate. So a lot of people here are probably either in high school or undergrad, and they might be wondering, should I be applying for an MD PhD? And this is an important question because if you are interested in doing an MD PhD, it does require a fair bit of preparation for it. And so deciding that you want to do it, it's often better that it happens earlier rather than later. And so some things that you could ask yourself are whether or not you are passionate about both science and medicine. So take both of these situations and invert them. What if you're passionate about medicine, but you're not really that passionate about science? Then that might make your PhD pretty hard because you might be really excited thinking about the patients that you want to see. And when it comes down to the actual research, you might drag your feet a little bit. You might not want to get all your experiments done. And so that might be a really unpleasant experience for you. Or you could invert the other way and say, well, maybe I'm really passionate about science, but I can't really see myself treating actual human beings. And if you're not super excited about medicine, it could also be very difficult for you because you'll have long days in the hospital. You might have long days in the operating room because if you're interested in being a doctor, medical school will still train you through every single specialty. So even if you may have no interest in psychiatry, you'll spend at least some time with psychiatric patients, or if you know that you don't want to do surgery at all, you'll still spend some time in the operating room as well. And so even that, having little interest in medicine would probably make that part of your training very difficult. And so people who want to do kind of this all-inclusive research, it could be a very valuable experience because there are different levels of research, right? Sometimes it's just understanding the molecule and how it interacts in the cellular level, right? We're made of cells, and maybe there's a specific molecule that might be used as a drug. But then you also have to understand how does it work at the human level once you give it to humans. And so for people who want to go the whole entire range, the MD PhD might be very useful in that because it gives you that full level of understanding. And secondly, if you want to be formally trained in scientific thinking. So like I said, people who have just an MD degree and no PhD, they can still do high impact science research. But the PhD is kind of a more structured setting where you're really going to be learning and thinking about science. And so, yeah, it's really about curiosity. So that could be a strong reason to do an MD PhD. So I think to summarize this slide, because I want to give all the other speakers a chance to speak, how do you be a successful MD PhD applicant? You basically have to have everything. And I know that sounds a little surprising, but I think, sometimes people will think about it as a checkbox list of things that you need to do. But imagine that if you took away any of these things, think about the doctor that you would want caring for you or your family members. Who would you want out there in the field treating your patients? So, for example, if you had an MD and they had an amazing GPA, they had amazing MCAT, and they love volunteering out in their community, and they have really great recommendations from people, but they've never been in any clinical environment, neither been in a hospital or a clinic, and they've actually just never seen patients before other than maybe visiting their own doctor every year. Um, then it would be a little worrisome because you're not really sure if this person knows what they're getting themselves into. And so that might be a problem if that student gets in and it turns out that they really don't like medicine at all. And so for each one of these aspects, it does sound kind of more like a checklist, but at the end of the day, each one is pretty important. You want a doctor who's passionate about medicine, but if they have a really, really bad GPA and they have a really bad MCAT score, it might appear to people who are on the admissions committee um, that this student is passionate about medicine, but they're not necessarily ready to put in the work that it takes to get a good GPA. And I think the main difference with the MD PhD is that you also need a lot of research experience because research is pretty hard. A lot of people don't really understand what they're getting themselves into when they want to do research because research already is pretty hard to do. If you want to join a lab and you say, just give me a pipette, I'll pipette whatever you want. I'll do as many gel assays as you need me to do. Even that's hard, and not everyone will let you do that for them. But for the ones that let you do that for them, that's some research experience. But when you do the whole PhD, people won't necessarily tell you what to pipette. You have to figure out what you want to pipette. And you have to read papers and literature to figure out what it is that you even need to pipette or what techniques, or maybe you shouldn't even be pipetting stuff. Maybe you should be scanning it with a microscope. Who knows? And so the biggest way to really show that you know what you're getting yourself into is having some research experience yourself and kind of showing that you've gone and gotten yourself knee deep into this field to show that you both have what it takes and you want what it takes. You want to get yourself into that. So I think that's enough to say about this.
So as you've heard, there are many, many different career paths and opportunities available. In particular for PhDs, this is more or less for biomedical PhDs, but is even broader for PhDs in other disciplines. Obviously, first and foremost, you can direct a research lab. You can also teach others about science, how to do research, or how to think about scientific questions and information. You can also work in a team to solve problems of health and disease at different scales, whether that be in academia, in industry, in government, in non-governmental organizations. You can also work in managing and coordinating large scientific projects, whether that's at different institutions in collaboration or between different countries on a global scale. For example, like with vaccination initiatives. And perhaps most interestingly and most importantly, you're very well equipped to engage in scientific communication by educating the public about some of the latest scientific and medical discoveries that they might otherwise not hear about, and also in advocacy and informing policymakers and key decision makers about issues that impact health and science and things that they should take into consideration when making these decisions and passing these laws. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but here are some of the examples of physician scientists, particularly within the first generation of physician scientists. You'll notice many of the people on this list are MD only as opposed to MD PhD. They have nonetheless made significant landmark contributions to society and to science, and many of them were honored with the Nobel Prize as well for these findings. And so really there's no one path that will get you to where you need to go, but the MD PhD pathway in and of itself is designed to help guide you and set you up by giving you the most optimal foundation and training in both of these disciplines, whether that's the critical thinking and the scientific research on the PhD side, as well as the clinical foundational skills on the MD side. So just a couple of these examples, you have Stanley Prusiner, who discovered prions. Stephen Rosenberg is really known as the father of TIL and adoptive T-cell therapies, particularly in the context of cancer immunotherapy. On that same note, Carl June is really the pioneer of CAR T-cell therapy. Eugene Braunwald is the father of modern cardiology. Thomas Sudhoff discovered how different neurotransmitters talk to each other. How neurons talk to each other by the coordinated release of neurotransmitters. Francis Collins really started the Human Genome Project, and later on went on to lead the NIH. And then up at Southwestern, we have Brown and Goldstein, who discovered LDL receptor biology and really key findings in cholesterol metabolism. And of course, Yamanaka is most well known for discovering how to induce pluripotent stem cells, which have really transformed the way we do a lot of research. Also not on this list, but it's important to mention Anthony Fauci, who we all know from the COVID pandemic, but also prior to that was key and played an instrumental role in discovering, HIV immunopathogenesis at the time as well. So tying this back to the way we started this talk, Noreen started us off with Surat al-Alaq. The first verse is read in the name of your Lord. The first Quranic verse descended was essentially a command to read and to learn. And so scholarly pursuit is incredibly emphasized in the religion of Islam. And so as a scientist, whether you're a physician scientist or a PhD, it's a very noble pursuit. You're working towards, producing knowledge for the benefit of humanity as a whole. You're essentially a lifelong student. And so that ties together the Islamic tenets of ilm or knowledge, amana, trust or responsibility, and then isnad, verifying information change. Because as you'll learn once you start doing research, a lot of times we go by the adage of trust but verify. And so you really work on trying to establish your claims and provide evidence for that before believing things like that. And so there is a very long history of scholarly excellence across all domains in Islam. Historically, the first university was Al Zaytuna in Tunisia in the 8th century, and then everyone has heard of Ibn Sina or Avicenna, was one of the leading physicians and philosophers and scholars of the time. So a little bit more modern examples. I won't go again into each one, but there are a number of leading influential Muslim scientists in the field of medicine and healthcare. Qureshi and Sahin developed the first mRNA vaccine that was used for COVID. Incredible impact there. Here in the medical center at Baylor, we have Huda Zohbi, who identified the genes responsible for Rett syndrome. We've also had Muslim scientists discover the genetic and molecular basis of diseases like ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. We have physicians who discovered entire diseases and have them named after them, like Behçet's disease. In the field of epidemiology, Rana Hajda is actually a world-renowned epidemiologist and public health leader who has really spearheaded global campaigns to adopt life-saving vaccines in other parts of the world through work at the CDC and also with the World Health Organization. Jackie King is an incredibly successful entrepreneur working in nanomedicine with many patents in things like insulin meters. And then Rania Awad is a psychiatrist who is really leading the Muslim mental health lab at Stanford and leading Muslim mental health conversations across the country. There have also been incredible impacts by influential Muslim scientists outside of healthcare. As you can see, many Nobel Prize winners in the fields of chemistry, as well as physics. And then also many lead geologists and roboticists involved in programs at NASA and such as well.
All right, so we've talked a lot about this very rewarding career path. So we also wanted to talk a little bit about how you can get involved in research so that you can get there eventually, inshallah. So in the interest of time, I won't go into too much detail, but for the audience of high schoolers and undergrads, you should understand that there's like three major kinds of research. There's basic science research, which involves like what you would typically think of as a lab, like you're working at the bench, you're working with mice, things like that. And then there's translational research, which is what I would say a good majority of MD PhD like physician scientists end up doing, which is where you take the research that you do in the bench, like on the bench, directly to clinical trials or to helping specific patients, like if you're doing personalized medicine or precision medicine or something like that. And then there's clinical research, which is what a lot of medical students and a lot of just physicians or MDs will end up doing, which is like reviews of literature that's out there, cohort studies of like a lot of different patients. They'll take all the data that they gathered from a certain subset of patients and try to figure out if they can find correlations to basically improve guidelines for different diseases. Or like write case reports on like very interesting patients that they saw and things like that. So for you guys, a lot of you will likely have more access to basic science research, especially at undergrad institutions. A lot of the like professors there will be working on basic science. So you can go to the next slide. All right, so where do we start? So a lot of this requires a little bit of confidence and willingness to fail. So just reach out to as many people as you can. Literally, the worst thing they can do is ghost you. So reach out to the AMWPA clinicians in the group. There's so many in the mentoring group, and I know a lot of them are doing various different kinds of clinical research or would be willing to help students. Your local universities. So I know in Texas, like UT Dallas, UT Arlington, Texas A&M, UH, like whatever is like your closest undergrad institution, just go online. They have directories most of the time for every lab in the undergraduate institution. And you can go and look at each of the professors and look at what they're doing and see what interests you. And then based off of that, you can reach out to them as well. And then a third group of people that might be a little bit harder to get a hold of, but are an option are clinicians at hospitals near you as well. So like in Dallas, UT Southwestern, obviously, or even other larger hospitals like Medical City Plano. Um, they also have similar directories, or if there are people who know people in the AMWPA group, they may be able to point you to the right direction as well. But they might also have projects that they need students to work on, or they might be interested in mentoring you as well, even if they don't have anything specific for you to work on. So it's a lot easier now because you guys have ChatGPT. So you can, and like other AI agents, so you can use your tools wisely and write an email that is targeted and not generic, talking about why you're interested in this person's whatever, a little bit about you, and attach your CV, and then just shoot your shot. And I think in the next slide, there's a little example email template. Yeah. So this is kind of an example. You just be like, hi, Dr. So-and-so, give your introduction, like what you're interested in. Even if you have no previous experience, just seem excited. The right people will reach back out to you and they will mentor you, and like you want those people who are excited to teach you to teach you. So if you cast a wide net, you'll get some good hits, inshallah. Um, and then, yeah, and then just talk a little bit about what they do. Okay, and we also wanted to list some opportunities for high schoolers and undergrads to get involved in research. This is by no means an exhaustive list, so you can use this as your starting point. So for high school, I know there's the Texas Stars program at UT Southwestern. It's extremely competitive, but I've heard very good things about it. There's also the Welch Summer Scholars Program, which is also very competitive, but I've also heard good things about. They basically match you with labs at different Texas undergraduate institutions like A&M, UTD. I think UH is involved in it as well. And then there's the MD Anderson Catalyst Program as well, which I don't know a whole lot about. So if Sarah wants to chime in and talk about it.
Yeah, sure. So MD Anderson has a lot of summer programs, some geared towards high school students, some towards undergraduate students, and some even for medical students across a range of different departments and specialties. They take a lot of students every year, and then at the very end, there's like a big poster session. Obviously, your mileage may vary depending on how much experience you have and how long it takes you to get familiar with the project and with the techniques that you're doing. But it's been a really great program for a lot of different students, and definitely worth checking out if you're interested or if you're in the Houston area during the summer.
And then in undergrad, there are so many opportunities. You just have to take advantage of them. So I feel like the number one thing that most people do is they will reach out to professors at their institution that they either had classes with or they found their research interesting, and then they will just continue conducting research with them throughout their time in undergrad. And then outside of that, there are these things called REUs, which are research experiences for undergrads. Basically, universities will have summer programs where they recruit undergrads from other institutions to come to their institution for a summer to do research. And usually they will pay for you and they'll give you a little stipend as well. So you can apply for those. They're like all across the country. Um, and I think Amgen is a version of that at UT Southwestern. And then NIH postbac. So basically, a lot of people, when they apply for MD PhD programs, they may not have as much research experience as is needed. So they will take like a couple gap years, like a year or two, and do full-time research at an institution like the NIH. And there were more before a lot of these recent funding cuts, but there are a couple of programs at the NIH that will fund these postbac researchers and basically give them the training that they need to apply to either MD programs or MD PhD programs while doing research. And then, so I went to UT Dallas. So I wanted to put the UT Dallas specific resources. So there's the Anson L. Clark Summer Research Program. You basically, if you get into the Honors College, you can apply to do this summer research program before starting your undergrad degree. And then that's what I did. And then I basically stayed at that lab the entire time because I really enjoyed it. And they like to choose mentors that are very willing to keep students for this program. So I think it's a very, very good program. And then there's also the Green Fellowship at UTD. So I think Noreen did this as well. So basically, in your junior year or senior year, you'll apply to research full time at UT Southwestern for a semester and you'll get class credit for it. It is rather competitive, but they will prefer people who are interested in doing an MD PhD and or a PhD. So it's very like they want to see that you have a little bit of research experience or research interest before you apply for it. And with that, I think that's everything. If y'all have any questions, you can speak up or put them in the chat, inshallah.
Just on the same topic that you were just discussing, there's a question from Dr. Rayhana in the chat about when high school students and college students should apply for research. Just since we did just mention all of the summer programs, the majority of these programs actually have application deadlines in the winter, so around December, January, for the most part. So those you actually do have to apply quite early for. But as far as reaching out to people and cold emailing or cold messaging people, you're welcome to do that whenever and try to schedule a meeting with these professors to work with.
I also, to add on to that, would recommend that you wait until you are a rising junior or rising senior in high school. That way you have more of the basic biology, chemistry, physics classes sort of squared away, and that way you'll understand your research a little bit more. But if you are very precocious and you really want to get started on this, um, if you have a personal contact, there's no harm in asking. And then that way you can get on people's radars early while you kind of mature and go through all of your classes. And then by the time you're a rising junior or senior, they're probably be willing to take you on.
In the same vein, I think there was another question in the chat about how to publish research as a high school student and present at research events and have poster presentations. Generally, it's like Noreen was saying, it's ideal to have a more longitudinal experience. So the more time you spend with the lab, the more you're able to contribute meaningfully to the actual project. As we said earlier, it'll take you some time to acclimate and to learn about the work that's being done and the techniques that you need to learn and become comfortable performing those. Especially when you are a student in high school, it's tough to find time to be able to come into the lab consistently. So you're probably only going to be able to be there a couple of hours a week outside of the summer. So it's tough to be able to contribute enough to be on a publication within that, those couple of hours per week. But if you're able to get started earlier on and, spend a couple of years there, you're more likely to contribute to something that can go somewhere that might be published. It's important to not go in with the expectation that you will definitely get a publication. That's quite difficult depending on where you're coming on in the project's timeline. But it's best to be honest about your goals up front with your PI and with the lab to see if they have a manuscript that's under review or something that might have a more immediate timeline and that might fit with the timeline that you're hoping for. And that generally will be easier to do as a college student given your schedule is much more flexible.
I think to comment on that about your goals, think about the reason why someone might want to have research publications And it's often because they're thinking that it would help them with applications later, help them with a resume. And part of that is true, that having a publication record might help with that. But then you also have to think, why why would admissions committees care about a publication record? The real question that they're trying to get at isn't whether or not you have publications. It's about whether or not that time that you spent doing that research, were you actually getting a lot of work done? Were you being a valuable player on the team? Or were you, I don't know, finding new ways to waste time? And believe me, there are a lot of ways to waste time when you're in the research lab, right? So the real the real question is, how can I get good work done as a high schooler rather than how can I specifically publish papers and have my name on it? Because authorship kind of requires that you make a critical contribution to the paper, whether in experiments, data collection, analysis, and that can be it just depends on what you're able to get done in that time. But the other thing is the timeline of papers. Oftentimes, you might do experiments and spend a year analyzing them, and then spend the next year going over the analysis and responding to feedback and trying to figure out how to make it work. And then you might have to do more experiences. So it could be maybe like 3 years from the time you actually did a contribution that ends up getting published somewhere anyway. So you might do really good work in high school and then the publications start rolling in after you're already in college. And I had a friend who had been volunteering in a research lab multiple summers at a research lab in Houston. And he had like a handful of publications by the time he was in college, but they all came in like after he started college. And he just kept on getting notifications, hey, we're publishing this, hey, we're publishing this, hey, we're publishing this. And so it's not necessarily about getting the publication while you're in high school. It's just about doing good work.
Yeah, research is definitely a long game. So you have to also be mindful of that when you approach these people, because they will, like it's just a mindset thing as well.
There was another question in the chat about if the summer students are funded or if they provide any kind of stipend or housing support. I believe all of the programs that we shared do provide funding support. Some of them generally will have you find your own housing, but there is a stipend allowance to assist with that.
I think that kind of payment for research, it can be a nuanced topic because there are some families where if the student is not doing research, they might be working like a summer job, and that might actually be important for them to like pay for their expenses. Like for example, a lot of undergrads, they may work a summer job so that they can pay for their tuition. Um, and so for them to spend time doing research unpaid, it can be a financial difficulty. That said, for people who do have the privilege of not having such financial strain, don't be afraid to do free work for people, um, because um, you learn a lot. And at the end of the day, you end up benefiting most from that experience. And so don't be afraid to do free work, but also if you do need the money for any reason, it's also perfectly acceptable to have a conversation and say that you might need some sort of compensation for the work that you're doing. But it's a tricky thing to navigate.
Also, I'm comfortable sharing my email, so I'm going to put it in the chat if anyone else wants to also do the same. All right, then we will wrap up now. Thank you all for joining us. I believe the recording will be posted on YouTube at some point, inshallah. But please reach out to us if you guys have any questions. We would be happy to help out anyone. I think our emails are in the chat.